Imagine a place so cold that metal can snap like glass, a place where rescue teams often refuse to go, a place larger than the United States and Mexico combined, yet almost nobody lives there. This is Antarctica. For over a century, humans have climbed the tallest mountains, crossed the largest oceans, and even walked on the moon. Yet there is one challenge that remains among the most dangerous on Earth: crossing Antarctica from one side to the other. At first glance, that sounds strange. How hard could it be? After all, modern technology allows us to fly around the world in hours. We have satellites, GPS, advanced weather forecasting, and equipment powerful enough to survive in extreme environments. So, why can't people simply cross Antarctica? The answer is far more terrifying than most people realize. Because Antarctica isn't just cold, it's an entirely different world. A world where temperatures can drop below minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit. A world where hurricane force winds never seem to stop. A world where one mistake can become a death sentence. And yet, the most surprising thing isn't how dangerous Antarctica is. The most surprising thing is that Antarctica wasn't always considered impossible. In the early 1900s, explorers believed they could conquer it. Some even thought Antarctica would become humanity's greatest achievement. They were wrong. Very wrong. Because Antarctica would soon claim lives, destroy expeditions, and create one of the greatest survival stories ever recorded. And what happened to those first explorers reveals exactly why Antarctica remains one of the few places on Earth that humans still cannot truly control. But before we get to that story, you need to understand what Antarctica really is. Because the truth about this frozen continent is even more shocking than its deadly reputation. What if I told you Antarctica is actually a desert, and that its greatest danger isn't the cold at all? Most people imagine Antarctica as a giant block of ice. But that's not what makes it deadly. In fact, Antarctica holds a secret that sounds impossible. It's the largest desert on Earth. Yes, a desert. When people hear the word desert, they think of endless sand dunes and scorching heat. But scientists define a desert differently. A desert is simply a place that receives very little precipitation. And Antarctica is so dry that some regions haven't seen significant snowfall in thousands of years. Think about that. The coldest place on Earth is also one of the driest. But that strange fact is only the beginning. Antarctica covers nearly 5.5 million square miles. That's larger than the entire United States and Mexico combined. 98% of it is covered by ice. In some places, that ice is over 2 miles thick. If all of Antarctica's ice melted, global sea levels would rise by around 200 feet. Entire coastal cities would disappear. Millions of people would be forced to move inland. But for now, that ice creates something even more dangerous. Isolation. In Antarctica, there are no cities, no highways, no gas stations, no hospitals, no permanent population. Nothing. Once you leave a research station, you enter a wilderness unlike anywhere else on Earth. Imagine being hundreds of miles from the nearest human being. No roads, no phone signal, no possibility of immediate rescue. Just endless white in every direction. And then there are the winds. Many people think Antarctica's biggest enemy is temperature. It isn't. The real enemy is the wind. Powerful katabatic winds race down from the high Antarctic plateau. These winds can exceed 200 miles per hour. That's stronger than many hurricanes. The wind doesn't just make Antarctica colder, it steals heat directly from your body. A temperature that might normally be survivable can suddenly become lethal. Exposed skin can freeze within minutes, sometimes even seconds. And then there is another hidden danger, one almost impossible to see. Beneath the snow lie massive crevasses, deep cracks in the ice that can stretch for miles. Some are hundreds of feet deep. Many are hidden beneath thin snow bridges. From above, they look completely safe. One step, one wrong step, and a person can disappear instantly. No warning, no second chance, no way out. This is why Antarctica isn't simply difficult. It is actively hostile to human life. Every mile crossed must be earned. Every decision matters. Every mistake has consequences. And yet, despite all these dangers, a group of explorers decided they would do the impossible. They would become the first humans to conquer Antarctica. Their mission would become one of the greatest races in history. But it would also end in tragedy. Because Antarctica was about to teach the world a brutal lesson. Two teams entered Antarctica hoping to become legends. One succeeded. The other walked straight into one of the deadliest disasters in exploration history. In 1911, the entire world was watching. Two explorers stood on opposite sides of history. Both had the same dream. Both wanted the same prize. And both believed they would be the first humans to reach the South Pole. One was a Norwegian explorer named Roald Amundsen. The other was a British naval officer named Robert Falcon Scott. What happened next would become one of the most dramatic survival stories ever recorded. At the time, Antarctica was still largely unknown. Maps were incomplete, weather forecasts didn't exist, radio communication was unreliable. The men heading into the frozen wilderness were essentially walking into the unknown. Scott's expedition was backed by the British Empire. His team carried scientific equipment, supplies, and enormous national expectations. To many people, Britain's victory seemed inevitable. But Amundsen had a different approach. Instead of relying heavily on technology, he studied the survival methods of Arctic hunters. He used sled dogs, he traveled light, he focused on speed and efficiency. Every decision was designed for one purpose: survival. Scott made different choices. His team used motorized sleds, horses, and human labor. The problem? Antarctica destroys anything that isn't perfectly adapted to it. The motorized sleds quickly failed. The horses struggled in the brutal cold. Soon, men were forced to pull heavy sleds themselves. Imagine dragging hundreds of pounds across endless ice, day after day, week after week, in temperatures far below freezing, with powerful winds constantly fighting against you. Yet both teams pushed forward. The race continued. Then, on December 14, 1911, Amundsen reached the South Pole. Victory, history had been made. The Norwegian flag was planted at the bottom of the world. Amundsen had won, but the real tragedy was only beginning. More than a month later, Scott and his exhausted team finally arrived at the pole. They expected glory. Instead, they saw something that crushed their spirits. A flag. Not a British flag, a Norwegian flag. Amundsen had beaten them. Scott later wrote in his diary about the devastating moment. After months of suffering, they had lost, and now they still had to make the journey home. The return trip became a nightmare. Temperatures dropped further, food supplies ran low, physical exhaustion became unbearable. One by one, the men began to break down. Then disaster struck. A blizzard trapped the team. The storm raged for days. They were only miles away from a supply depot that could have saved their lives, but they couldn't reach it. The weather was too severe, the cold was too intense, the winds were relentless. Eventually, Scott and his remaining companions died inside their tent. Frozen, exhausted, defeated by Antarctica itself. Months later, a search party discovered their bodies. Alongside them were diaries that revealed the horrifying details of their final days. The story shocked the world. For the first time, people realized something important. Antarctica wasn't merely difficult to explore. It was capable of defeating even the best prepared humans on Earth. And if highly trained explorers could die trying to cross just a portion of Antarctica, what chance would ordinary people have? Yet incredibly, the most dangerous chapter in Antarctica's history was still to come. Because only a few years later, another explorer would become trapped on the continent in a disaster so unbelievable that Hollywood movies still struggle to capture it. A ship would be crushed by Antarctic ice, an entire crew would become stranded, And what happened next would become the greatest survival story ever told. If the story of Scott proved Antarctica was deadly, the story of Ernest Shackleton proved it could be even worse. In 1914, Shackleton announced one of the most ambitious expeditions in human history. His goal wasn't just to reach Antarctica, his goal was to do something nobody had ever done before: cross the entire continent, from one side to the other. It would be the ultimate conquest of Antarctica. Newspapers called it a historic mission. The public celebrated, and for a moment, it seemed like Shackleton might achieve what no explorer ever had. But Antarctica had other plans. As Shackleton's ship, the Endurance, approached the continent, something unexpected happened. The sea ice began to close around the vessel. At first, it didn't seem like a major problem. Ships had encountered ice before. The crew expected it to break apart eventually. It didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The Endurance became completely trapped. Imagine being stuck inside a wooden ship. No way forward, no way back, surrounded by an endless frozen ocean. The crew waited, and waited, and waited. Then came the sound that every sailor feared. Cracking. The ice wasn't releasing the ship. It was crushing it. Thousands of tons of Antarctic ice squeezed the Endurance from every direction. The pressure became unstoppable. Wood splintered. Beams snapped. The hull began collapsing. Eventually, the crew was forced to abandon the ship. Everything they had depended on was gone. They were now stranded on floating ice in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. No rescue helicopters, no satellites, no emergency beacons, no modern technology, nothing. Just 28 men standing on drifting ice hundreds of miles from civilization. Most people would have assumed they were doomed. But Shackleton refused to give up. For months, the crew survived on the ice. They endured freezing temperatures, violent storms, hunger, isolation. Every day brought new dangers. Every night brought uncertainty. And then things became even worse. The ice beneath them began breaking apart. Their temporary home was literally disappearing beneath their feet. If they stayed, they would die. If they moved, they could die. Shackleton made a desperate decision. The men launched small lifeboats into one of the roughest oceans on Earth. Towering waves slammed into the boats. Freezing water soaked their clothes. Hypothermia threatened everyone. Yet somehow, they survived. After days at sea, they reached a barren island. But they were still trapped. Rescue was impossible, unless someone attempted one of the most dangerous journeys in history. Shackleton selected a handful of men and sailed more than 800 miles across the Southern Ocean in a tiny lifeboat. Even today, experienced sailors consider the voyage almost unbelievable. The ocean they crossed is among the most violent on Earth. One mistake, one storm, one wave, and they would vanish forever. Yet against all odds, Shackleton reached help. Months later, every member of the expedition was rescued alive. Every single one. It remains one of the greatest survival stories ever recorded. But here's what makes the story truly important. Despite all their courage, despite all their preparation, despite one of the greatest leaders in exploration history, they still failed to cross Antarctica. The continent won again. And even today, more than a century later, Antarctica continues to defeat people in ways that would have shocked Shackleton himself. Modern explorers have GPS, satellites, and equipment Shackleton could never imagine, yet Antarctica is still claiming lives. The reason is far more terrifying than most people realize. You might think that Antarctica's age of danger is over. After all, we live in the 21st century. We have satellites orbiting the Earth, GPS accurate to within a few feet, aircraft capable of flying across continents, weather forecasts powered by supercomputers, and survival gear that explorers from a century ago could only dream about. So surely Antarctica isn't as dangerous anymore. Right? Wrong in reality. Antarctica remains one of the deadliest environments on Earth. And the reason is simple: technology can reduce risk, it cannot eliminate it. Because Antarctica isn't fighting against your equipment, it's fighting against human biology itself. The first problem is temperature. The cold here isn't just uncomfortable, it's destructive. At extreme temperatures, batteries drain rapidly, fuel thickens, mechanical systems fail, plastic becomes brittle, metal can crack. Even the most advanced equipment begins to break down. And when equipment fails in Antarctica, there is often no backup plan, no nearby repair shop, no emergency shelter, no easy escape. Then there is the problem of distance. Imagine suffering an injury in a major American city. Help arrives within minutes. Now imagine suffering the same injury in Antarctica. The nearest rescue team could be hundreds or even thousands of miles away. Bad weather might prevent aircraft from reaching you for days or weeks. Sometimes rescue isn't possible at all. But perhaps the most terrifying threat is something most people never think about: the whiteout. A whiteout occurs when snow, clouds, and light blend together into a single featureless landscape. The sky disappears. The horizon disappears. The ground disappears. Everything becomes white. Completely white. Imagine opening your eyes and suddenly losing all sense of direction. You can't tell up from down, near from far, safe ground from a deadly drop. Many explorers describe whiteouts as one of the most disorienting experiences imaginable. Some have walked in circles without realizing it, others have stumbled dangerously close to hidden crevasses. And then there is isolation. Humans evolved in communities. We are not designed to spend months surrounded by endless emptiness. The psychological effects can be severe. Researchers have reported sleep problems, depression, anxiety, memory issues, even hallucinations. Imagine looking out your window every day and seeing nothing but white. No trees, no cities, no wildlife, no signs of civilization. Just a frozen world stretching endlessly in every direction. For weeks or months. This mental challenge is one reason Antarctica remains one of the toughest places on Earth to work. Yet despite all these dangers, people continue trying. Some explorers have successfully crossed parts of Antarctica. A few have even completed extraordinary journeys across vast sections of the continent. But these achievements come at enormous cost. Years of preparation, specialized training, millions of dollars in support. And even then, success is never guaranteed. Because Antarctica always has the final say. One storm can end an expedition. One equipment failure can force a retreat. One hidden crevasse can change everything. Which brings us to the biggest question of all. If Antarctica is so dangerous, if crossing it is so difficult, why do people keep trying? What is hidden within this frozen continent that continues to pull explorers toward it? The answer reveals why Antarctica may be the last true frontier on Earth. Millions of people have climbed mountains and sailed oceans, but only a tiny number have dared challenge Antarctica. What keeps drawing humans back to the most dangerous continent on Earth? For thousands of years, humanity has been driven by a single question: what's beyond the horizon? That question pushed explorers across oceans. It led people into deserts, jungles, mountains, and eventually into space. Every generation believed there was one more frontier waiting to be conquered. And today, Antarctica remains one of the last. Not because humans can't reach it, not because we don't understand it, but because Antarctica refuses to be conquered. Unlike almost every other place on Earth, Antarctica does not adapt to humanity. Humanity must adapt to Antarctica. And even then, survival is never guaranteed. Think about it. We've built cities in deserts. We've tunneled through mountains. We've crossed oceans in giant ships. We've landed on the moon. Yet one of the most difficult journeys on Earth is still crossing a frozen continent right here on our own planet. That alone tells you something extraordinary. Antarctica is different. It operates by its own rules. The continent doesn't care how rich you are. It doesn't care how advanced your technology is. It doesn't care how experienced you think you are. The same forces that defeated Scott, the same conditions that trapped Shackleton, still exist today. The wind still howls across the ice. The crevasses still wait beneath the snow. The storms still arrive without mercy. And the cold remains as deadly as ever. Yet people continue coming. Scientists travel there to study climate change and the history of our planet. Researchers search for clues hidden deep beneath miles of ice. Explorers test the limits of human endurance, not because Antarctica is easy, but because it is difficult. Because there is something deeply human about facing the impossible. Every generation wants to know how far it can go, how much it can endure, how many limits it can break. Antarctica represents the ultimate test, a place where nature still holds the advantage, a place where even the smallest mistake can have enormous consequences. And perhaps that's why Antarctica fascinates us. In a world where nearly every corner has been mapped, photographed, and explored, Antarctica still feels unknown, still feels wild, still feels larger than humanity itself. So, can people cross Antarctica? Technically, yes, a small number of elite explorers have accomplished extraordinary crossings under carefully planned conditions. But for the vast majority of humanity, Antarctica remains one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. A continent where survival is never guaranteed. A continent that has humbled empires, explorers, and adventurers alike. A continent that continues to remind us that nature is far more powerful than we often imagine. And maybe that's the real reason Antarctica matters. Not because it is impossible to cross, but because it reminds us that there are still places on Earth that cannot be fully controlled. Places that demand respect. Places that challenge our limits. Places that make us realize how small we truly are. Because in the end, the story of Antarctica isn't really about ice. It isn't about explorers. And it isn't even about survival. It's about humanity's endless desire to push beyond the edge of the known world. And the frozen continent at the bottom of the Earth remains the greatest reminder that some frontiers never stop fighting back. If you enjoyed this journey into the most extreme place on Earth, subscribe for more stories about history, geography, geopolitics, and the incredible forces that shape our world. Because the next story may be even more unbelievable than Antarctica itself.